do want to say, though, the stock market just hit a new all-time high. The 401ks just hit a new all-time high. And oil is dropping like a rock. Other than that, it's another day in paradise.
All right, President Trump says his Iran deal is already easing pressure on the global economy. Oil still hovering under $80 a barrel. Welcome to the Big Money Show. I'm Taylor Riggs, along with my co-host, Dagan McDowell, Brian Brenberg, David Asman, and with us for the hour, maybe two if he's lucky.
If I behave.
Fox business contributor, entrepreneur, and host of The Fixer, Marcus Lemonis. Great to have you. So the White House has put Vice President J.D. Vance's planned trip to Switzerland on hold after Iran issued a new warning over the future of the deal. The administration says it's negotiating from a position of strength, with Vance saying Iran is in the weaker position.
What matters much more is the number of launchers they have, and importantly, the teams on the ground that have the capacity to launch those missiles. Their ability to launch missiles has been substantially degraded. Is it zero? No, but it's substantially degraded. If you look at the Gulf Arab allies, and obviously the Israelis who faced a lot, the two of them together faced a brunt of these missile attacks. Each of them feels substantially safer today from the Iranian missile threat than they did before. Obviously, that is something that we would like to continue.
So a lot of moving headlines. It seems like even though the markets are closed on Juneteenth, Marcus, we're getting headlines almost every minute. Iran came out and they said that the reports that the strait was closed are false. They want to reassure that it is open. But the Lebanon Hezbollah stuff is kind of throwing a wrench in the deal as well. And then Vance not going to Switzerland. How do you sort of parse all these facts?
I think everybody's spending far too much time trying to figure out whose shoe is bigger and who has leverage and who does not, as opposed to what's right for everybody. And I'm not opposed to the Iran deal. What I am opposed to is giving them time and oxygen to resuscitate themselves. And if they're saying that they're going to honor the 60-day period, then I think at some point we have to start to believe people. And having rhetoric to the opposite of that, I think, creates more conflict. It's almost like you're just poking people. I don't like it.
What rhetoric?
The rhetoric of, well, we'll just drop bombs on their head.
Yeah.
I think at some point we just need to be commercial about things and think about it as a transaction. Yeah. They stand to gain a lot of cash if there's compliance. The question is, who's going to create the compliance? In my mind, it's not the U.S. It's all the folks over in the Middle East who have something to finally gain if compliance is the way that they access cash.
Brian, that sort of hints on what you've been talking about, where this has been sort of reordering the way certainly the Gulf nations are thinking about the region, reordering how important the strait will or won't be in the future, 5-10 years from now. How do you think about this?
Maybe. Yeah, you raised an interesting question. You said you think time is on Iran's side.
I think time is on Iran's side.
See, I don't know about that.
If in this environment where they're able to start generating cash flow again before they sign something formal.
I guess, but I mean, yes, if they're moving oil, they get cash, right? Yep. Okay. I kind of wonder if actually it's flipped and time is on our side, because the more time goes by, what happens to Iran? I think the world has already told us. I don't think any of the Gulf neighbors think Iran's going to comply. I think they don't believe they're going to comply, which is why all of them are finding a way to cut Iran out of their lives. And that means cutting the strait out of their lives. So I think the more time goes by, the more the world circumvents the strait, circumvents Iran, finds new ways to order global energy. The folks in the Gulf do the same thing. And I think Iran slowly finds itself without its main point of leverage, which is the Strait of Hormuz. And I think there's a 15th point in this memorandum of understanding. And I think and I know you didn't like it, but I think the 15th point is, when we observe you rebuilding your nuclear weapon capability, we'll drop a bomb on your head.
I get that. Is China and Russia going to be part of this equation in terms of, you say everybody's going to cut Iran out of the equation? Can China and Russia just give them the cash that it needs to get the energy and the oil?
Could.
And Russia's got its own.
Yeah.
Russia doesn't have to worry.
It's interesting about China, David, weigh in here. Trump had said he actually was grateful that China President Xi Jinping had remained more neutral, that they had asked them, please don't go behind our backs and sell them drones, sell them weapons, and that he said China had sort of stayed out of it. We had talked on this program that I was actually surprised that China wasn't a heavier force in supporting Iran. We hadn't heard a lot from China. This really was an Israel, U.S., Iran thing, even though China needs the oil. How do you...
China knows who's got more weapons, who's in the position of power here. It's the United States. China understands that we're the strongest power in the world, that despite the fact that they can hold up the strait, et cetera, that we've got the power. And China was also getting desperate for energy. I mean, China really needed energy. So I don't think their ties, they're not close to anybody but themselves. I mean, and like Iran, what they say and what they do are two very different things very often. So I think the main thing that I look at, you were talking about transactions, Marcus. I mean, look at the transaction of oil right now. 1 week ago, it ended the day at $84.88 for West Texas. A barrel of oil. Now it's 10% below that. I know it's ticking up a little bit today, up into the high 76. Now it's 77 and change. But again, it's still about 10% below what it was 1 week ago. And that's half of the 20% that we've been losing over the past several months. So we're making progress there. Do I have problems with the deal? Yes, I do. Of course, this notion that somehow 60 days from now they're going to be able to start charging tolls for an international waterway is ridiculous. I don't think the U.S. is going to buy into that at all. It does worry me that Lebanon which you know a lot about, Marcus, is still essentially controlled. So much of it is controlled by Hezbollah. And in fact, the president of Lebanon wants to deal direct with the U.S., and he's not being given the chance. I think we should deal directly with the president. He, by the way, happens to be a Christian. But the point is that we still have our military might there. Again, Marcus, you don't like it, I know, but Brian and I are realistic. It's true. We know, does anybody doubt that if they pose a serious threat to the United States interests in the next 60 days, that he would hesitate?
That I'm in favor
about bombing.
But that
I don't think. I think we've seen him time and again. Just a couple of weeks ago, he did it. Of course, the big blowouts a year ago, and then several months ago when this thing started. I don't think the president is afraid of using power when he's asked to, and I believe him when he says he doesn't want innocent people to be killed. And there are innocent, in any war, there are innocent people. There are a lot of innocent casualties. It's happening in Lebanon. It's happening of course, in Iran itself and in the related Arab countries. So I think he really does want peace. And I think as long as our military, we've got about a fourth of our entire military forces available right now to hit that place if necessary. And I think the Chinese and the rest of the world, including Iran, knows that.
Dagan, I want you to go where you want to go, but I'll punt this to you with some stats that I was looking at. I tend to follow the money, and I think the money is telling me how investors are sort of betting on winners and losers. European funds just saw 10 consecutive weeks of outflows from ETFs. Chinese equity funds are looking now at 12 straight weeks of outflows. And this is all as U.S. stocks attracted record inflows last week. Investors are obviously piling into the technology sector. That they want unprecedented $120 billion poured into U.S. equity funds last week. U.S. household equity wealth is up $6 trillion this year alone. So I guess if you follow the money, you have people thinking we're pulling out of China and Europe and we're investing in the U.S. How do you read this?
I don't think that the flows say anything about Iran, and about whether we're there or the memo of misunderstanding. I think that the money flows and the action in the market this year is about artificial intelligence, the trillions of dollars that is being spent, percentages of our economy that is being spent, and the very transformational nature that will drive economic growth here into the future. Europe is a dead economy. walk around the streets of small towns in France. A friend of mine who grew up in Russia, tough as nails, works in finance. She was just in Italy. She said, you'll know Italy is very dead and very dirty and kind of like falling apart. And I went, yeah, it's a dead economy. And that's what it is. China struggling. China importing 40% less oil during this conflict than it did last year. Nobody can figure out why. That is the reduction in the drop in barrels a day. 4 million is the equivalent of how much Germany and France consume combined. So people are raising the question of what's going on with China's economy, and we are leading in AI. So I don't think the flows say anything. But I will weigh in on what is happening with the 60-day pause in this memo of misunderstanding, because that seems to be the read by everybody who's gone through it 800 times. Two things that needed to happen are happening. President Trump said, and I think this is the most telling thing, he always tells you exactly what he is thinking and why he is acting the way he is. He wanted to avoid economic catastrophe. So what does this pause do? What does this cessation of hostilities do? It begins the rebuilding of energy inventories. The prices matter less than what happens in places like Cushing, Oklahoma. We were near minimum operating levels, operating bottoms at the NYMEX delivery hub of Cushing. We need to rebuild these inventories. Now, I know that there's no such thing as a shortage in economics, price spikes to equalize supply and demand, but oil shortages would be met with much higher prices to destroy demand, curb demand. So we were potentially looking at $6 a gallon gasoline. President Trump did not want that. Politically, maybe. Economically, most certainly. Eventually, consumption would drop. Then, to keep energy-related inflation expectations in check, boom, you get that. But also to keep in check expectations that the United States government will not be spending hundreds of billions of dollars in borrowed money over there in military actions. So it is about the inflation expectations of higher energy prices and the inflation expectations of, and the blowing out the deficit expectations of a long-running military action. And on those two things, the Pentagon just told U.S. lawmakers it needs $80 billion for the Iran war and other bills. Very low number compared to what people were initially talking about. And then Iran, in terms of rebuilding, getting the oil flowing and rebuilding inventories here, there, and everywhere, Iran just published a new chart showing 2 shipping lanes in the Hormuz to the south of the ones that Tehran unveiled weeks ago. The new lanes are, this is Javier Blas, to the north of the ones used before the war. The Omani lane remains in operation as well. Rebuild inventories, keep inflation expectations in check in terms of energy prices and our spending.
Let's talk about these markets. Congratulations, you guys. We made it a week. Big SpaceX IPO. Priced at 135, opened at 150. The markets are closed today. We topped out at 201. I know Marcus was looking at that 200 number. We were down yesterday to like the high 180s or so. But I think people here were trying to understand, if you want to bet on Elon, before we only could use Tesla, now you have an option if you want to bet on Elon to use SpaceX as well. So SpaceX, not surprisingly, massively outperforming Tesla in the last week. The S&P 500 up about 1% or so over that same time period. What do I want to ask? Is anyone still buying SpaceX? No?
I like the volume that we saw flow through for over the 5-6 days. I thought that was pretty impressive. I think you're seeing a lot of folks out there now starting to wonder, what's the optionality that you could have if you own SpaceX, and what else is going to move in there? There was a couple of acquisitions, I think one specifically that was announced this week, right when the stock was at $200. So they probably said, like, we have the right to call it at any time. If you're buying into that stock today, you're clearly buying in for what it could be and what could merge in. Question is, what are the valuations?
By the
gonna
way,
be?
Morgan Stanley and a lot of other investment bankers are beginning to offer these packages to customers. These, a lot of them are private equity packages that could turn into IPOs, etc. When I see that sort of thing happening from these big companies to retail investors, I begin to wonder, geez, maybe things are overbought right now. I mean, it's just like I'm holding back. I usually just go into indexes itself because I don't like to prejudice myself on certain stocks. But the point is that it just seems like everybody's getting on board thinking this thing is going to continue to go forever.
At 94 times price to sales, a lot of people are thinking this feels overvalued. We'll continue to debate that certainly on Monday when the markets open.